On Zombie Reddit, today's story is...
My mother abandoned her baby, but 20 years later she turned up when my father had money. Her new boyfriend threw away Dad's last belongings after his death. When my mother was at university, she became pregnant with me. Although my father was her partner at the time, she did not wish to have a child at that stage of her life. After my birth, she ended her relationship with my father and completely renounced her custody rights. She left me entirely in my father's care and decided not to have any kind of relationship with me. From then on, my father became my whole world. He took on the responsibility of raising me alone, although he received great support from my grandparents. Honestly, I never felt like I was missing out on anything. My father was always affectionate and was present at every important moment. My grandparents were also extraordinary. They were affectionate, kind, and gave me so much love that I never experienced a void in my life. The three of them, my father and my grandparents, made up my family. My mother never showed any interest in knowing how I was. She never called me, never visited me, never tried to find out about my life. Everything went on like this until I was 6. By then, my father had worked hard and had got an excellent job in an important company. We were able to move out of my grandparents' house and start living on our own. It was the fresh start we needed, but unexpectedly, my mother decided to reappear. After years of absence, she suddenly wanted to be part of my life. She said she missed my father and wanted to be part of our family. Honestly, I think most people in my situation would have been happy to have their mother back, but even as a child I couldn't like her. There was just something about her that made me uncomfortable, although at the time I didn't fully understand why. I never understood what my father saw in her or why he forgave her so easily. He seemed so in love, almost blinded by his feelings for her. If it had been up to me, I wouldn't have wanted to have anything to do with her. She always acted like a modern, carefree mother. From the beginning, she insisted that I call her by her name instead of referring to her as mom or mother, especially in public. She thought it made her seem younger or closer, but to me it just seemed strange. During my adolescence, whenever I brought friends home, she would be excessively friendly with everyone, especially the boys. This was clearly not normal, and it made me feel embarrassed. I remember how many of my friends confessed to me that they were attracted to her. I hated hearing that, but I couldn't blame them because my mother intentionally acted inappropriately towards them. She wore overly revealing clothes and always made suggestive comments to them. On one occasion, during my graduation party, some friends and I were by the pool. Suddenly, my mother appeared in a swimsuit so small that it left very little to the imagination. Then she lay down and asked one of my friends to apply sunscreen to her. My other friends started cheering and laughing. It was uncomfortable and truly humiliating for me. I remember wishing with all my might that she would just go back inside and let me enjoy a quiet day with my friends. It was frustrating because I could clearly see what was happening, but my father either didn't notice or chose to ignore it. Deep down, I always knew that my mother didn't really love him. She was with him because it was easy and convenient. He was stable, financially secure, and completely devoted to her. She got everything she wanted from him, but I don't think she ever gave him the same kind of love in return. When she became pregnant with my brother, another complicated situation arose. Initially, she was upset. She didn't want another baby and told my father that she planned to terminate the pregnancy. She kept saying that it would ruin his perfect body. They argued constantly, and it wasn't easy to be around them during that period. But eventually, for reasons I will never fully understand, she changed her mind and decided to continue with the pregnancy. She went ahead, and for that, I am extremely grateful. I feel a great love for my brother. I cannot imagine my life without him, and despite everything else, I am glad he is here. Just as my mother never acted like a mother to me, she also never acted like a mother to my brother. It was always my father and I who took care of him. She was completely absent in all matters of motherhood. She never cooked for us and never shared time with us as a family. It was as if she didn't care whether we lived or died, as long as she could continue to shop or go out with her friends with my father's money every day. Because of all this, it was completely natural that my father, my brother, and I became very close over time. We were a unit, our own little family within a larger space. We supported each other and understood each other in a way that she never could. Over time, we simply accepted that this was the way things were. My brother and I stopped expecting anything from her. We rarely spoke to her or spent time together unless it was necessary. The only times we really saw her were when we visited my father after we had moved away. Then everything changed just a year ago when my father fell ill. After feeling unwell for a while, he underwent several tests and was diagnosed with an illness. What followed was a long and exhausting process of treatments. My mother, on the other hand, was completely disconnected from the situation. She acted as if it wasn't important that her husband, the father of her children, was fighting an illness. She carried on with her life as if nothing had changed. She kept up her usual routine of shopping and attending parties with friends. It was incredible and deeply painful to observe how little she cared. My brother and I did everything we could for my father, but her lack of support made everything much more difficult. Despite all the efforts and treatments, we finally lost him. My father passed away after months of struggle, and the loss has been incredibly painful for both my brother and me. I cannot begin to describe how much we miss him every day and what we would give to have him back with us. What makes everything worse is seeing how our mother has acted since his death. For her, it seems that losing him was not significant. She has not shown any real pain or sadness, or any sign that she even misses him. It is as if his death has not affected her at all. Fortunately, my father had made a will. He made sure that my brother and I inherited his house, while my mother received the money in his bank account. When the will was read, my mother was furious that she had not received the house. She felt she had a right to it and made no secret of her anger. She even threatened to sue us to force us to give it to her. She thought she could intimidate us to get what she wanted, but after consulting with lawyers, she must have realized that she didn't stand a chance. Finally, she calmed down and approached us with a request. She wanted to stay in the house rent-free. I refused immediately. I told her that if she wanted to stay in the house, she would have to pay rent like any other tenant. This caused a big argument. She felt that I was being unfair to her and that I was treating her like that for no reason. She also mentioned what my father would think of all this because she knew him very well, which I don't think is necessarily true. I thought that my father would have wanted her to stay in the house without paying rent. She didn't like my answer very much, but the house now belonged to us. It was no longer her decision. If she wanted to stay, she would have to pay. It was as simple as that. In the end, she reluctantly agreed to pay a minimal amount of rent. The truth is that my brother and I are doing well financially. We don't really need the money, so for us, this wasn't about the rent itself. We just wanted to make it clear that it was no longer her home, and we wanted to set boundaries by creating a landlord-tenant agreement. We also made sure that if things ever got complicated in the future, we would have the legal right to evict her if necessary. Since my father's death, my mother has wasted no time in returning to her old ways. She started dating men without restrictions, which comes as no surprise to anyone. It's always been that way. But then 2 months ago, she introduced us to someone new, Bodhi. Bodhi is about our age, and to say that it's unpleasant to see our mother dating someone much younger than her would be an understatement. Bodhi seems to despise my brother and me. He has never shown us any kindness, and things have gradually been getting worse. You see, since my father's death, my brother and I have been organizing and packing up his belongings from the house. We have done it very carefully, taking our time, making sure everything was packed and moved with respect. By this time, we had already packed and moved most of my father's belongings, but there were still some boxes left in the attic of the upper floor. Those boxes contained some of my father's heaviest objects, and it was not possible to move them all at once. So we decided to take care of them gradually. We thought they were safe where they were, at least for the time being. But with Bodhi, that wasn't the case. He's been constantly complaining about how we're handling my father's things. According to him, we're making a big deal out of carefully packing and storing everything. He suggested several times that we should just get rid of everything. Then this week, the thing that brought me here happened. My brother and I went to the house to finally take away the last of my father's belongings, only to discover that the attic on the top floor was completely empty. We stood there, unable to believe it. Those boxes, the last pieces of my father's life that we hadn't moved yet, were gone. When we asked my mother, she acted as if she had no idea where the boxes were. The next person who might know was Bodhi. His answer made me completely indignant. He said as if it were the most natural thing in the world that he had thrown them away. He explained that the boxes were taking up too much space in the attic and that he needed the space to move some of his things there. It was better for him to get rid of the boxes and move on. Those boxes were not just old objects to us, they were fragments of our father's life, memories we will never have again. To clarify, Bodhi lives in the house rent-free, while my mother only pays us a very symbolic rent compared to what all the neighbors in the area pay for similar houses. It is a 4-bedroom house, and those boxes were in an attic on the upper floor, which my mother rarely used or where she kept something. If Bodhi didn't like the boxes there, he could have called us, my brother, and I would have gone immediately to move them ourselves. Bodhi absolutely should not have thrown away those boxes. My mother could also have warned us. At this point, it was clear that Bodhi had thrown away my father's belongings out of spite. He didn't really need the space, there is plenty in the house, but he was bothered by the fact that there were things of my father's there. The first thing I did was to shout at Bodhi. My brother, who was as angry as I was, went over to Bodhi and threatened to hit him. At that moment, Bodhi was no longer so arrogant. He seemed frightened by how we confronted him. He began to back away, but he was still talking, insisting that he had gone through the boxes himself and decided they were just junk and not worth keeping. My mother made the situation even worse when she stepped in to defend Bodhi. Until that moment, she had been acting as if she knew nothing about what had happened. She feigned innocence, pretending she had no idea that the boxes were missing. But when Bodhi started to feel the pressure, she stepped in to support him. To her, what Bodhi did was completely reasonable. She tried to present it as an act of kindness on Bodhi's part because he was simply concerned about us. She had the audacity to claim that he did it just to help us speed up our grieving process. I replied to my mother, with anger and all the frustration I felt, that neither she nor Bodhi had the right to decide how my brother and I should process our grief. We had just lost our father, and it was completely normal for us to take time to come to terms with that loss. Even if those boxes might contain what they considered to be junk, it was not their place to throw them away without even talking to us first. My mother scoffed at what she said next. She told me that I was exactly like my father, but she said it as if it were some kind of insult. She said it was exasperating how I could never let anything go. At that point, my brother reached his limit. He looked her straight in the eye and told her that if my father hadn't married her, he would have cut her out of his life a long time ago. Bodhi and my mother were still trying to argue, but I told him, without consulting my brother because I knew he would think the same, that from that moment on they would have to start paying the full rent of what the house was worth in the neighborhood, plus an additional amount. Yes, for them it had become one of the most expensive houses in the neighborhood. And I could do it, because the contract included a clause to increase the price up to a certain limit, and I raised the rent to the maximum allowed. Of course they didn't like what they heard and they protested. But at that point I told them they could either pay or they could pack their bags and take all their belongings out of the house. My mother continues to harass us by text, saying that we can't do this. She also claims that Bodhi feels belittled by the way my brother and I confronted him. She claims that we were too aggressive, that we made him feel small and humiliated. Maybe he should hang out with real men and not someone who feels bad about a confrontation. He didn't feel small and humiliated when he threw the stuff in the trash. I don't understand why he feels that way now. Update 1. A week has passed since my post, and although my brother and I have gotten some kind of payback by raising his rent, we are still trying to decide what to do about everything that has happened, whether to take legal action against our mother and Bodhi for having thrown away the boxes. We have consulted a lawyer, and unless we can prove what was in those boxes and their value, it is a case where we have little to gain. Because they could contain gold bars, which was not the case, or dirty old socks. We know what was in them, but apart from including objects without great monetary value, although they are sentimental, we have no way of proving it to a judge. In other words, if they are dirty socks, the judge will think that we are only doing this out of revenge against my mother. So that is temporarily on hold. To add more drama to my story, my mother has just announced that she is going to marry Bodhi. Our mother has decided to marry the same man who disrespected us, who disrespected our father, and who showed no remorse whatsoever for throwing away his belongings. And she posted an announcement on Facebook for everyone to see, as she is very angry with us for raising the rent, which he will have to start paying next month. Her post included several affectionate photos of her and Bodhi, showing off her engagement ring as if she were the star of a romantic story. In the text, she expressed how no man had ever made her feel the way Bodhi did and how he made her happier than she had ever been in her entire life. If that doesn't seem like a message directed at us and what happened, what I'm about to tell you will perhaps clear up any doubts. She added, "I wish I had met him sooner." Understandably, everyone is surprised and upset. My grandparents are the first to be furious with her. They are not only angry about what happened with the boxes, but also about how inappropriate it all seems. They think, like my brother and I, that the timing could not be worse. It has not even been a year since my father passed away. Update 2. It's been 2 weeks since my last update, and for all those who suggested we take our mother and Bodhi to court for throwing away the boxes, we have decided not to. It's not because we agree with what they did. We are far from it, but because the legal process seems more trouble than it's worth, both emotionally and practically. Instead, my brother and I have made a clear decision. We will evict them from the house. We plan to give them their formal 1-month notice to leave. Once it has been served, we will rent the property to someone else at a much more reasonable price, something much closer to its real value. Selling it is not an option. This house is the last tangible connection we have with my father. It is where we grew up, where so many of our memories with him were created, and there is no way we are going to abandon it. We are simply not ready to part with something so deeply linked to my father's legacy. Anyway, this week, my mother started sending out her wedding invitations. She even sent one to my brother and me. We had thought we wouldn't receive any, but it's clearly a way of rubbing it in our faces. When my brother and I declined the invitation, she didn't take the hint. She tried to communicate with us directly, acting as if we were the ones in the wrong for not attending. She said that although we had been too cruel to her over a few unimportant boxes, by raising the rent on her own mother's house, she was still extending the courtesy to us to witness this special day. She called it the day she would marry the love of her life. It was clear that she wanted to deepen the wound and take revenge for what we had done. We told her we wouldn't be attending, and that she could celebrate the love of her life without us. Of course, instead of reflecting on her actions, my mother took to Facebook to present herself as a victim. She made a dramatic post about how some family members were boycotting her wedding, and that because of those relatives, without naming us, she would feel very alone on that day. It's really funny how she presents herself as the affected party, as the victim, when she is the one who has continually disrespected and hurt us. But even if she considers us bad children, we will still send her a gift for her wedding. It may not be the gift she expects, but it is one that comes from our hearts. Update 3. After consulting a lawyer, my brother and I sent our mother an official notice to vacate the house. We also made it clear to her that if she didn't move out in time, we were prepared to take legal action against Bodhi for disposing of our father's belongings and demanding compensation for their value. This was not an empty threat. We now have some evidence of the contents of those boxes. My brother thought he might have some photographs of their contents, and after searching his gallery for several days, he found images of what some of them contained. It's not completely visible because the photos only show the open boxes, and there are many objects in the background that don't appear, but it's a start. Not surprisingly, my mother did not take this news well. She called us back, crying and furious, saying that this is the worst wedding gift that children could give their mother. I know it bothered her that we liked living in such a big house and that we planned to continue doing so after the wedding. It was almost comical, as if she expected us to overlook everything she has done just because we would feel guilty for her. But we told her that she has until the date indicated in the document, whether she likes it or not. My brother has also told her that it is an act of kindness because it will help her speed up the grieving process of losing the house. Apart from all this, my mother is furious that no one in the family is planning to attend her wedding, not even relatives on her side. She is blaming us for turning everyone against her, which, in a way, might be partly true. I have been very frank about what Bodhi did with my father's belongings and how disrespectful they both have been. To everyone who has asked me about it, I have told the whole story, and at least decent people are angry about it. Many in the family do not understand why she is rushing to marry someone half her age, especially under these circumstances. It's not just that she moved on quickly after my father's death, it's her choice of partner and everything that has happened since, which is suspicious to say the least. The bottom line is that my mother now has no choice but to move out of the house. Whether she ends up marrying Bodhi or not, it's time to take out the trash. Update 4. 2 months have passed since my last update. As expected, my mother and Bodhi refused to respect our notice and leave the house on time. When the day came for them to move out, my mother openly defied us, telling us that she would take us to court if we tried to enforce the notice. We knew this was going to happen, but we were prepared and had a surprise gift to ruin her wedding. If she wants to play in this field, so can we. At that moment, my brother and I discussed how to handle the situation, and honestly, we decided to be a little vindictive, not much. Well, yes, just as she had been to us. We thought that her wedding would be the perfect opportunity to show her that every action has a consequence. We knew that she and Bodhi would be out celebrating all day, so we waited patiently for the right moment. When the day finally came, we made our move. As our keys still worked, we had full access to the house. We went inside, packed up all of Bodhi and my mother's belongings, and placed them right on the sidewalk. We didn't stop there. My brother and my uncle went the extra mile to change all the locks and install security cameras. We wanted to make sure that, if my mother and Bodhi tried to resist, we would have all the evidence necessary to make the moment even more satisfying. We invited some of our relatives to dinner that night. Everyone knew that my mother and Bodhi would not take their expulsion well, and they wanted to see their reaction. Late at night, my mother and Bodhi finally returned, and it was clear that they were somewhat intoxicated. They couldn't get the key in the door properly, so it took them a while to realize that it wasn't working. They were so focused on getting in that it took them a while to realize that something wasn't right. Finally, they started banging on the door when they couldn't get in, and that's when my brother and I opened the door. We told them that this was not the time to be banging on doors in other people's houses. At that moment, they realized that we had changed the lock and that they were not going to be able to get in there. But before any of us could say much more, some of the family started to come out, including my grandfather. He said loud enough for the neighbors to hear that the house belonged to us and that they had breached the eviction order. Bodhi tried to intervene and continue the discussion. I guess he has gained confidence in these months, and it is no longer appropriate to call him a coward. He was furious, his face red with anger, as he tried to defend his right to live there. But my brother wasn't going to allow it. He and my uncle pushed Bodhi away as he tried to get closer. My brother then threatened to call the police if they didn't leave immediately. At that moment, I pointed out where all their belongings were. Legally, we can leave them outside, although they were not in plain sight, but on the side of the house. I told my mother that all they had to do was take their things and leave. No more discussion, no more drama. For a moment, both my mother and Bodhi looked outraged and humiliated. So they loaded some things into their car and left, although they left behind many others that they couldn't take with them. I hope they pick them up quickly, because it's not as if they'll be protected for long out in the open and without security. Update 5. For those who asked what happened to the remaining boxes of my mother and Bodhi, I will start with that. They took all the boxes, but I don't know if it was them or other people. Because my mother came to ask me about the remaining boxes, I told her that if they weren't where I left them, then I had no answer for her. They may have been stolen, or she just wants to annoy me. My answer to her is pretty much the same, I don't care. We have also sued Bodhi for throwing away my father's boxes. And as I said, it has not been the most productive use of our time, but at least the judge has ordered a payment of $2,000. Also to my mother, because during the time she lived in my house, both with the eviction order and the time she refused to leave, she did not pay the rent even once. Another $2,500 from my mother. I have to talk about Bodhi too, who probably thought that marrying an older woman would get him a house. But he got an older woman, was evicted from a house, and on top of that with a bill to pay of $2,000. I don't think it was the deal of the century for him. For a reason, when I met him, he didn't seem like the most intelligent person. At least he didn't pay for the wedding as far as I know. That all came out of my mother and the money she had received from my father. But he had his moment of lucidity when he applied for an annulment of the marriage with my mother. I don't know where Bodhi has gone now, but my mother is living in a small apartment on the outskirts of the city. If perhaps he hadn't done what he did with the boxes, he would still be living in my house today. Instead, there are now tenants who value the house enough not to lose it, and they pay on time, which guarantees that they won't lose their boxes.